Hello, hello. Welcome to Divine Alchemy. My name is Shantae. It is a pleasure to have you here. Today's topic is something that I have been very curious about for a long time, my whole life. And I think it's something that it took me a really long time to see not just how to pair sexuality with spirituality, but how they both overlap and how they are completely intertwined. I think for many of us, we often see spirituality and sexuality as two completely different things. And we may dabble in both spaces, but we mentally keep them separate. And I think a lot of this is from the conditioning that we've all been through for hundreds and thousands of years, which was an incorrect human interpretation of spirituality that saw sexuality as more functional, that it was biological, it's functional, it's necessary, and it generally sits within a marriage between a man and a woman. And the whole point is to have children, and that's it, and there's nothing more. And then you'll find people who have explored the realm of sexuality and how broad that is, and how diverse. There's different ways to express that between people, all through, consensual adult practices. But very rarely will people in those spaces also overlap into spiritual spaces. And sometimes they overlap, and sometimes even with that, it's still compartmentalized. And I think the reason for this is there's two reasons. One comes from humans a very long time ago believing that women are less than men. And so women were owned by men and were controlled by men and were just functions for men. We were childbearers, we were slaves, we were owned, and we were there to bear children. Eventually we had domestic duties. And a lot of what we have today is because women fought for it, not because it was easily welcomed. And a lot of this comes from an incorrect, false belief that men and women are not equal, and incorrect statements that are made in different religious texts. But there's been this belief for a long time, and it doesn't just affect people who have been raised in dogmatic belief systems. If you live in a capitalist society, if you live in the West, you know that men and women are just not treated the same. They're not treated the same when it comes to the gender pay gap, when it comes to seeing a doctor, when it comes to going through like the legal system for anything. There's always a discrepancy, and it just changes depending on, well, there's usually a discrepancy, not always, but usually, and it depends on who you're speaking to. But there's this belief that because women were less than men and women were seen as dirty property, sexuality, because at the time was generally believed to be sacred between men and women, it was always a like derogatory thing that you kind of had to do. Like, you poor thing, you have to do that to continue the human species. And because it was associated predominantly with women, because at the time most people were heteronormative, it was seen as a derogatory thing that was not spiritual. And I think when we think of a lot of the belief systems that have held people back, it's because it wasn't just sexuality that was a problem. It was women's sexuality and women enjoying sex and enjoying pleasure and loving their bodies that was stripped of women. But I think the other part that is really interesting in this topic that isn't often talked about is the idea of individualism versus collective relationships and interdependence. And I love to look at nature as an example of what spirituality means and how it works, because nature is a perfect reflection of the divine. Like, nature functions perfectly if humans didn't intervene, and nature will go through her different seasons. But when you look at nature, when you look at any species, whether it's like a tiny, tiny, tiny bacteria versus plants and birds and different mammal groups, everyone is interdependent with each other, not just their own species, but with other species. And everyone is procreating. I lived on this property in a rainforest, and in the summer months, there were so many cicadas, these beetles. You couldn't see them, but you could hear them. But there was so many of them around the property that it was actually deafening. It was deafening. And I just thought that they were talking to each other. And one person came to do some trade work at the property, and he explained to me that, oh, that's actually just the mating call, that the men are doing the mating call for the male for the female. And I thought that was so sweet. Like, it was like their romantic kind of pickup line, but it was extremely loud for months and months. But when you look at nature, nature is constantly procreating. Nature's not like, I need to go on my journey on my own. And there's nothing wrong with being single. There's nothing wrong with not being married. There's nothing wrong with not having children. But what I'm trying to explain is that spirituality is always about a relationship between us and other. It's never a relationship with yourself as a solo being, because your true self is actually a divine being. And whether you have a loving partner or not, you're always in relationship to the divine beloved. You're always in relation to other. So sexuality is spiritual because it's an expression of spirituality expressed in a physical form in the most common example, between two people. But the other thing that is really special that we don't talk about is how everything that we experience in our body is felt by the soul. Some people have this incorrect belief that because, okay, I'm making a judgment here, but I think it's incorrect, that the soul, because it's eternal and it's not physical, you can't touch it. But I actually believe that the soul feels everything that our body feels. It feels everything. So any harm that is felt by the body is felt by the soul. And all of our emotions, they're not expressed in the mind, they're actually expressed in the soul, and they manifest in a physical form through the thoughts in our mind and changes in our physiology, such as like the feeling of anxiety. But all of our emotions sit in the soul. But that also means that when we experience pleasure, we actually experience it spiritually with the soul. I believe that orgasm is a brief reflection of what it means to live in the spiritual worlds. Because when you orgasm, you are in a state of bliss and you are in a state of oneness. And if you have an intimate relationship with the person that you're with, I don't mean like a committed relationship, but you're close to each other, there's trust, that orgasm can be bigger and deeper as well. But your orgasm is actually a divine expression, because it's where your soul experiences the highest state of pleasure. And for a brief moment, you are kind of cut off from this physical world. Like, you don't live in the physical world anymore. You are living in your original home, which is the spiritual world. And I think society will eventually get to a point where we'll realize how important sexuality and pleasure is for our spiritual health, for our emotional health, and our mental health. At the moment in the West, a lot of what we see is compartmentalized spirituality, or very limited ways of viewing desire, very old, outdated ways of viewing desire and stereotypes. But a lot of it is still for the pleasure of someone else, as opposed to the pleasure of your own soul, to experience pleasure for your own soul's pleasure. And when we experience orgasm, I think that's when we really connect to the divine. Like, why not? Why wouldn't it be that way? There's nothing about us that is not spiritual. There is nothing about this world that is not spiritual. And we've been given all these nerve endings and all these erogenous zones all over our body, plus energetic arousal, which doesn't even touch the body. We've been given that for a reason, because we are meant to experience pleasure in this life. Pleasure relaxes us. It helps us connect to ourselves. If we're with a partner, it helps us connect to our partner, and it helps us connect to our true self, because when we are in that state or building up to that state, we are kind of removing all the layers of our day-to-day life and removing all the worries and all the humanness of our life, and we're coming back to our beautiful divine self. So I think spirituality and sexuality overlap completely, and I think we're still at the very beginning as a society of understanding what does that actually mean and how do we better understand that. Just like how now we are starting to understand how bottled up emotions can lead to different autoimmune disorders and diseases and cancer. So a lot of the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, that's to do with the emotions and the relationship of emotions with the body. But the relationship of sexuality with the body and with spirituality, I think we're at the very beginning of that whole journey, which is really, really exciting. And I feel that for anyone who is growing, like if you're growing on your spiritual path and you don't really know where sexuality fits in, this is reminding you that it is absolutely part of your spiritual path, and that not to separate it or feel there's any compartmentalization you have to do, or that there's any shame. There's no shame in any of this. People just project their own shame onto others, but you don't need to buy into that, my friend. So I would love to know what you think of this and what's been your journey as a spiritual person, also exploring sexuality, and where you found these overlaps on your journey, and what's the wonder that you've discovered when the two of these integrate. Thank you.